TPR.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the TPR Pod. My name is Ali. Sorry about my voice, I've had a cold for a week. This episode is with a very smart, very well spoken person, Zeerak Ahmed. It is an episode that I thought would be about one thing, and we spent most of it talking about something completely different. I thought I was going to speak to Zeerak about his monthly music newsletter and playlist project called Hamnawa. We did do that, but we spent the majority of the episode talking about his other project. He's a software designer, engineer person by trade, and what he has done is he's working on this Urdu keyboard text library autocorrect kind of endeavor, which is just a fascinating discussion. We talk about why Urdu is lacking in the print department, as in the print technology department, how that translates to lack of Urdu text being available, lack of information coming through because people speak Urdu, they don't speak English, but Urdu doesn't have the capacity to be written in all these ways. It's great. History, culture, so much obsession with fonts, and then the difficulties of trying to overcome these problems in the form of the work that Zeerak is doing. Great chat. If you're on YouTube, quick disclaimer, if you're on YouTube, this is a slightly shorter version of the episode. The audio version is the full chat where we talk about when Zeerak moved to the US. I have a rant about LGS Georgetown, but the Hamnawa discussion and his app discussion, his keyboard discussion are all in this episode. But without further ado, let's jump right in. So here is pod 156 with Zeerak Ahmed. Acha, then you get done with university. Where was university? Like generally, East Coast, West Coast,
New Jersey, East
Midwest?
Coast, yeah.
Acha.
So,
Then where do you
yeah,
go?
so I was East Coast, then I came to Seattle, stayed here for 3 years. I was lucky that a lot of strong network of people from the kind of university moved with me to start work here. So we had a kind of existing network of people that we moved with. So I started working here, then left for grad school for a bit, then landed back here.
What did you do in grad school?
So I studied design in grad school. So that's where I like made a little bit of transition in my career.
Design? What sort of design?
Yeah. So I end up, my current work is software design. The design programs vary in terms of what their focus is.
Right.
Again, because that's often a new discipline. So I went what could be described as an architecture school, but was branching out into new kinds of design, like product design or systems design. So I came out of that program. My focus was mostly on software.
So like UI, UX design?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Or maybe there's like lots of specialties. So the sort of work I do is often where you need to know more than just the software to go back in.
Right.
So that was just kind of where my training comes from. But then depending, you could, even in software design, there's so many areas of focus. So you could be in like design systems, which is basically saying, okay, can you start building Lego blocks for other people to build software, which is in a way, a different discipline than, okay, I am building software for banks. I must understand how banking works before I can like build a way to transcribe it in software. So there's increasingly larger amounts of specialty that have not yet been described. The industry hasn't like grown enough to describe them well, and there just aren't enough people to create specialties. Like लोग इतने कम हैं कि अगर अभी से specialize करना शुरू कर दिया तो कोई hiring ही नहीं हो पाएगी.
Yeah.
So the industry is just growing. So that's kind of how I meandered my way through.
Why did you choose design?
That was my original interest, actually, going into computer science, was like how people use technology.
Right.
So I enjoyed the like underlying discipline of building the technology as well. But if I had to choose between what to build and how to build it, what to build was more interesting to me. So that's kind of where I landed. I think it was just an interest pathway.
Is that relevant to what your current job is then also?
Yeah. Achha. That is basically my day job.
Okay. Now there are two paths where logically, like I could ask you how the keyboard comes around, and is that connected? Because I'm like, okay, keyboard, computers, he's studied.
Yeah, let's go there. It's an easy pathway, actually.
Yeah.
Because the other one is random.
Sure.
It's not random actually, but it's a different pathway. So the keyboard actually was a grad school project for me. So that's where it started. So I've been working on it for 5 years now.
What is it?
So there's a sort of larger theme and there's a smaller theme. So let's start with the specific thing. The specific thing is that it's a new type of keyboard for the Arabic script. So I'm starting with Urdu, but it could generalize to other things. And the idea being that typing modes of the current Arabic script are stuck in the way that typewriters were built. And there are more things that we can do with software that can make that typing experience different and hopefully better that we just haven't got around to trying. So there's a couple of innovations. So one is just the idea that abhi tak hamare paas be pe te ke button different hote hain. If you are typing in multiple languages, that means suppose if you are typing Sindhi and you are typing Urdu, then you will use whatever keyboard has the superset of letters, because Hindi has more letters than Urdu. And in software now, we can compress those keys into one. Like anything that looks the same, like be pe te, it doesn't need to have separate buttons, because software can just add the dots for you. So that's kind of one innovation, which is okay. Can we
like
start?
How do you mean? Like, do I special characters where you toggle them via alt daba ke jo? Is that how you mean it, or do you mean that the software contextually like
just autocorrects, autocompletes like on a phone? So आप एक button दबाते हैं, so you will type the key that looks like a bay but पे कोई नहीं है, and then अगर उसमें लफ्ज़ में ते है या बे है, वो खुद ही निकल जाएंगे.
Right. More like intuitive,
it's pretty natural.
Sort of.
It's pretty natural interaction for people that have been typing on smartphones. And the other thing that it does is it has multiple benefits. The first is that it reduces the number of keys. So a normal Urdu keyboard has 39 letters. This has 21. A normal Sindhi keyboard has 53 letters. And so for people that are our parents' generation or our kids' generation, who have not grown up with this reality of the world as imbued, then having a much simpler way to start typing reduces that barrier to entry. And so you find it just much easier and much less intimidating to go into because there's less stuff there. So that's one part. The second is that it opens the door for multilingual typing in the future. So I'm not there yet, but that is the goal, which is to do like a kind of multilingual autocorrect, the same way that happens in kind of a Latin keyboard, which is that to type French or to type English, you are not switching keyboards. You can do this, use the same instrument. And so we haven't done that for the Arabic script yet. So that is the goal to get into.
How did you come to this idea? Because it's very specific.
It is very specific. So the larger idea is that I was interested in building Urdu language technology. So for me, the question was, how do we better represent Urdu on the internet? Because as a kind of population of the world, or in terms of language speaking, Urdu is one of the largest speaking languages in the world, but it's still, if you talk to most Urdu speakers, they are not using technology in Urdu. They're not consuming content in Urdu, especially written. Audio still works. And so for me, the interest was, okay, why is that happening? And what are the things that we need to build to change that perception? Once you start going into it, you realize this has been happening for centuries. This is not a new phenomenon. So one of the stories I like to tell is that when the Gutenberg Bible was published in Europe, which is the introduction of movable type to Europe, uske fauran baad, printing presses in other languages and other scripts started popping up, in Europe as well. But it took 300 years for Arabic to be printed in movable type in any large format. 300 years, a long time, right? And so once you realize this happened before, फिर आपके इतना अच्छा internet पे भी Urdu नहीं, and then you see, okay, these patterns are very, very similar. Like it is too similar to ignore. And so underneath, once you start digging the surface, you realize that most of the technology that we use today was built in the West and is Latin first. And the way that other languages have adapted is, okay, what is the smallest change that we can make for it to work with our language? Arabic script has some intrinsic constraints, such as the fact that the letters are connected, it's cursive, which make this transition difficult. And so often the way that we have dealt with this compromise, we're like, अच्छा language को कैसे बदल सकते हैं fit करने के लिए technology में. And I think that is the other way around. Like, but at the point now, especially with software, where we no longer have hardware constraints, that this method of working is no longer necessary and in fact restrictive, and is damaging to the underlying culture. And so the goal is, okay, where can we start to change this perception? So for me, there's lots of areas that need work. Voice interaction needs work. Underlying language understanding needs work. Fonts need a lot of work. Like fonts, a lot of people care about. Fonts need a lot of work. And keyboards for me became an interesting area as well. So I started with typography. So a lot of whenever I present this work, I talk about typography a lot, but that's where I started. The reason I went to the keyboard was because for me, if the goal was to actually build language technology that changes the course of other people's engineering work as well, then building a keyboard is interesting because I have to build multiple layers of technology that are each useful in their own regard. So for example, मुझे अगर पता होता मैं किस मसले में पढ़ रहा हूँ तो मैं शायद बहुत सोच समझ के पढ़ता. That to get this autocorrect working, you need a underlying data set, right? Which is that you need for the algorithms to make better predictions. They need good data to go off of, and there is no good Urdu data. That is open source.
It would have to start by some, I suppose, like a dictionary, perhaps even just to have dictionary, like a baseline of words.
Yeah, so
and
a dictionary
then variations.
And most of the language, the way that language models work today is what are the most commonly used words,
right?
And what is the most common order of words. Right. So you need some written prose as well.
Right.
So अब वो ढूंढने के लिए अच्छा, you're like, okay, what can I start scraping? So anybody can build a proprietary data set, right? You can like scrape stuff on the internet, build a proprietary data set, and then suddenly you realize that all of it is wrong.
Okay. Wrong how?
If you take wrong in the sense that अगर आप English में अगर आपको text मिले जिसमें लफ्ज के बीच में randomly space डला हो या कोई random typo, you would consider that doesn't happen in English text very often.
Yeah.
It is surprisingly prevalent in Urdu text. In fact, the amount of digitally typeset Urdu text that underneath the characters are correctly placed is minuscule, very, very small. I can probably tell you the websites where it's going to be correct.
And why do we think this is? Just because of the issues that lead you towards thinking that this keyboard is necessary? Those compromises have resulted in these poor data sets.
That and then a couple of other things. One is मतलब typing tools नहीं हैं तो गलतियां लोग करते हैं. So you're unlikely to make to correct typing errors. The second is fonts, which is Nastaliq fonts जिस तरह बनी हुई हैं उसमें we have a strong calligraphic tradition. तो उसमें लोगों के बहुत aesthetic standards बहुत high हैं कि लफ्ज में कितनी जगह होनी चाहिए, कितना space होना चाहिए. Those aesthetic standards have not translated in that level of fidelity to the digital forms of Nastaliq. तो जब हम Nastaliq लिखते हैं तो कभी कभार हमें पसंद नहीं आती उसकी placement, space ना space. तो लोग ये करते हैं कि मर्जी से डाल देते हैं शक्ल.
Really?
So that's a pretty common occurrence. The second occurrence is because the letters are cursive, then the use of the space is inconsistent. So जो letters जुड़ते नहीं आप उसमें आपने space देना है कि नहीं देना लफ्ज के बीच में, because the space in a kind of technological term is used to indicate the end of word, but in our script it can also be used to indicate the end of the grapheme or the words that connect. So जैसे अगर आप क्या लफ्ज लिखें, कोई लफ्ज लिखें जिसमें भी बीच में वाव आता हो.
I don't know why I'm thinking,
connect,
but like I'm thinking of like parvaz, where pe re ke baad there's a gap and then a vav which also has a gap and it's all one word.
Right. So in that case, it's pretty common कि re या वाव के बाद space डला हुआ होगा.
Yeah.
And from an underlying technical term, the computer has like no idea what. If you don't know what words are, then you're like, what am I supposed to do? So, अच्छा मैं भी इस मसले में जब पढ़ा, so I was like, okay, this is bad. So we had to build a data set of our own, and then we open sourced it. So the keyboard is just me. The data set is when a lot of other volunteers came in. So I found 8 or 10 volunteers, roughly that number, who, because the data set had to be open source.
Sure.
Because we had to work with other people's existing language, unke saath milke, and then we just, it's the sort of work where it lends itself to requiring open collaboration and reuse. So we had a lot of people donate their published text to us. The people that we got donations for text were people that we believed had high language standards. ताकि हमें इतना पता हो कि ज़बान तो ठीक लिखी हुई है, क्योंकि वो एक अलग problem है.
And this is all Urdu we're talking about.
All Urdu.
Right.
So we got text that we thought was editorially and linguistically had some high standard. उसको लाके then we built software tools and manual processes to start fixing all the digital underlying errors, so that the software could start fixing. And then we started annotating it for various reasons. So you could say, acha, one common occurrence in Urdu text is quoting from other languages. So, English quotation, Arabic quotation.
Right.
You have to tell the computer what things not to consider. And so
Right.
we have to go in and label all of that data. And creating a labeled data set is really hard work.
Right.
And so one of the reasons why it's really hard to build Urdu software is that anything you want to go into, you need a labeled data set. And so if everybody had to do this work, then it would become too onerous for anybody to move things forward. So for me, like building the keyboard enabled opportunities to do this kind of work, which is, okay, ye humne data set bana diya. So now if anybody wants to build any other kind of language tech, they could just use the same data set, even if my keyboard has no other underlying utility or usefulness. So that's how I kind of squeezed my way into this corner. And then, so now there's, the dataset project, which kind of is ongoing, continues. We keep fixing things, making it better. And then there is the keyboard project, which hopefully will launch soon.
So what form will this keyboard project launch in? Is it going to be for like?
So the keyboard is an iOS app for now. So you can just download the app and then use the keyboard in whatever app you want to use in.
So that's someone would use what's the fucking keyboard?
Gboard, SwiftKey.
Sure, SwiftKey. Yeah. So it's like an analog for that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that, but specifically for Urdu, and you download a separate app.
And how's it? Is the technical side of putting all of that together, has that been fruitful? Like, was that easy to do?
It's not easy. I mean, this is the most engineering work I've ever done.
Right.
So my background is in engineering, but I don't do any other engineering work mainly aside of this. I do here and there, like joke projects for people, but not serious engineering. I haven't made it my professional work.
Right.
So this is the most engineering work that I think I've done in my professional career ever. So it's difficult, takes a lot of time, because engineering work is difficult, especially product level engineering work. So you can build a proof of concept pretty quickly of things. But then when you get to a point where you need it to work in settings where you are not present to supervise, where you need to get the number of times that technology fails down enough to the point where I can send it to my parents and have them use it without me calling them. That requires just a level of finesse and a level of attention. So we have a few hundred people that are using the keyboard in beta and have been for a long time. So very minuscule things we are tracking and trying to figure out when issues happen, when autocorrect fails, when the app has underlying issues. So it's hard work, but I think it's fruitful in the sense that it's work that I can now look back at and say there is like few other people working on this sort of thing. And it moves, not just is it like it could be a useful piece of technology for people, but it moves thinking forward. Like part of the reason why I find this work interesting is that if you are looking at it as a software developer that is now building technology in Pakistan for Pakistani audiences, that you have a different mode of thinking. Like the way that you are thinking is not acha West mein software kaise chali for Western customers, so bas uska analog bana. But that there is a fundamentally different way of saying, okay, can we start with the people first? What is it that we need in this market, and then build backwards? And so I think that intellectual shift and being able to talk about it through an actual piece of work rather than just in theory, I think is is the sort of most rewarding aspect for me in terms of doing this work.
Yeah. Why did you? One thing I was thinking was, what was your connection with like Pakistani culture / the Urdu language, where you even thought that this was necessary?
That's interesting. It's hard to describe. My father was involved in Urdu publishing for a little while, editorial, linguistically. And so the Urdu language as a whole is as strong in my household. और उसमें पढ़ने का, like reading Urdu is a strong tradition. Maybe I have not taken it on as strongly. I've taken it on more in later life than kind of school life, because our school life was all in English. So I think it was just a sort of cultural prevalent thing for me growing up, just knowing the Urdu language as a sort of thing that was important to us. It becomes really stark when you see people from other countries, non-English speaking countries, use technology. So for me, one of the stories I like to tell is that in grad school, as we were thinking about what projects to do, I was working with 2 Spanish speaking colleagues, और वो Excel इस्तेमाल कर रहे थे, and I was just helping them out with Excel. And their Excel formulas were all Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not a VLOOKUP आपने करना है तो VLOOKUP होता है bus करावे.
Yeah, yeah.
अच्छा. So I'm helping them trying to use their computer, and now I have to learn Spanish as well as figure out the technology.
Yeah.
And so like eventually you figure out like you have some sort of analog. And then so they were, I remember, quite struck by the fact that I was using English as my like main form of technological operation, and to them they wouldn't know why they would ever make that mistake. And so when I described what the issues were and why we didn't, to them it's unthinkable that this is even a concern in modern life. I mean, if you that audience, and if you tell them that until the 80s we were handwriting all our newspapers, pagal ho jate hain log.
I didn't know that this was a thing. We were handwriting. We didn't have Urdu printing presses for our newspapers.
We didn't like them. So until the late 80s, until the late 80s, जंग अखबार नवाए वक्त कातिबों की आर्मी होती थी जो हाथ से हर चीज लिखती थी, and then it would be lithographed.
Wow.
So lithography is like film projection,
Yeah.
right? So you project it onto a thing and then it works out. So you can, but the actual underlying dummy would be handwritten until the late 80s. And then 50 से हम कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि हमें कोई अच्छी फॉन्ट्स मिल जाएं जिसमें हम प्रिंटिंग शुरू कर दें. पाकिस्तान बनते ही हमने गवर्नमेंट पाकिस्तान प्रिंटिंग प्रेस खड़ा किया. हमने कहा फॉन्ट्स बनवानी. फॉन्ट्स बनाई, हमने कहा इतनी हमें अच्छी लगी. And so then we continued handwriting it for the longest time because we were attached to our calligraphic tradition, and most of the fonts were pretty bad in a different sense. Iran went a different direction. Most of the Arab world went a different direction, but we stuck to our.
So Nastaliq is that the font wali baat that you're saying. Nastaliq, for people who don't know, what would be your explainer? I would say it's the way we write and the Persians write it, the Iranians, but not how the Arabic people write it.
Yeah, it's a calligraphic tradition. So I think if you abstract it out a little bit, there is many different traditions of writing the Arabic script. There's a very strong calligraphic tradition, which is 1,000 years old. So it started developing in like 1000 AD. और उसके बाद से develop होता जा रहा है. So we developed different styles for different things. So for example, if you go to Morocco or Turkey or whatever, you see Arabic calligraphy in bricks, for example, or in buildings. अच्छा, वो एक separate style है, which was built for that purpose. Similarly, Quran लिखने का एक different scribal style है. And so Quran लिखने के लिए एक separate style develop हुआ, which was easy to read for lots of people. And so that's what became the Naskh style. And then we had a different calligraphic tradition called the Nastaliq style that was shared in what is now Iran and what is now Pakistan and India. So these are just various styles of writing the different languages. Some became more prominent than others. So Nastaliq is the defining feature about it is the sort of angular nature of it. कि आप ऊपर ऊंचा शुरू करते हैं top right पे, and then the word slants downwards towards the end.
Bottom left.
तो वो उसके that is one of its defining features. तो ईरान में Nastaliq printing नहीं होती.
Right.
So if you ever Google image search Irani newspaper or Farsi newspaper, it doesn't look like Jang Akhbar की शक्ल नहीं है उसकी.
Oh. Because that was what my question was going to be. We do it, they do it. We didn't figure it out. They maybe
so
did.
Why didn't we just take the tech? When it became clear that Nastaliq was going to be hard to print, they decided that they were going to change their printing tradition. So Nastaliq exists now as a sort of decorative ornamental art form. Right. And as a calligraphic art form,
right.
But they don't print in Nastaliq as far as my knowledge is aware. So वो लोग करते हैं कि उन्होंने they developed a couple of fonts that to them they were Persian in nature. They were distinct from Arabic fonts, but they were not Nastaliq. So उन्होंने Nastaliq को mimic करने की कोशिश छोड़ दी. Yeah, I wouldn't call it a compromise. I would call it a different direction. So they went a different direction totally, and that became their kind of new tradition.
Okay.
And they took on printing that way. For us, we decided that's not a direction we wanted to go into.
Yeah.
Balki jab Jung and Nawai were commissioned fonts, and for a while when they were moving to digitally typeset fonts, they would print half the newspaper handwritten and half the newspaper digital as a way of proving to their audience that digital is okay. ठीक है, सही है, compare कर लें.
So you think that this sort of, it's not just that the people, it's what I'm trying to sort of construct in my mind is that the aesthetic attributes had such great value that it's not just the people making the newspapers who were obsessing about it. It's also the people reading who had strong opinions on what our text should look like.
Yeah, totally. And this is true today.
Yeah.
So it's really strong opinion and people really care about fonts. Like one of my favorite stories to tell people outside of Pakistan is how much Pakistanis care about fonts and how few fonts we have.
Yeah.
Like it's a very hard problem to understand, right? Like, if you think about it in English terms, if you're in the UK and you tell people how opinionated we are about fonts, that we dislike a font enough that we will decide to
Yeah.
handwrite the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just crazy enough to begin with. And then you say, after all of this, we can name on one hand all of the fonts that we are likely to use for printing. It doesn't add up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the thing that is prevents this from happening is lack of technical expertise, difficulty in creating new technology. And so that for me is the motivation to start doing some of this work, which is how do we make that easier for people? So for
And
someone that is
is this also something where, there's always that ongoing debate of
mm,
English medium school versus Urdu medium school. Our government language is English, but it's going to be Urdu one day. Was this sort of uh, aesthetic argument and lack of technology one of the things that has held back that promised conversion? Give us a one day we will be an Urdu medium country.
let me tell you a few stories that are
Okay.
will answer your. I don't even need to make an argument. I will just tell you a few
Okay.
stories. Um, Arabic script जब print होनी शुरू हुई,
Huh.
तो Arab world में, like not even Pakistan, but like in the Middle East, there was a strong argument that बहुत लोग proposal करते थे कि अच्छा भाई, what is the sort of new level of Arabic? And so there was this famous proposal that was meant to fight illiteracy, which is to say कि Arabic में cursive खत्म कर दें, letters का जोड़ना.
Right.
Let's just make them exactly like the Latin alphabet, that they don't change form. एक एक शक्ल
Okay.
बना दें और printing करनी शुरू कर दें. This will help people
Yeah.
learn Arabic more.
Yeah.
So obviously it didn't go anywhere
Yeah.
because we still type Arabic or write Arabic connected. Turkey switched their script. So
Fully.
it's a pretty common transition, which is to say, okay, like Latin script or other languages will give us progress in a way that our languages won't. So it's an argument that is made globally, and we make that argument also. So हमारे लिए भी काफी common है. The other interesting story I like to tell is Nuri Nastaliq, which is the most commonly used Urdu font. So if you pick up a book, pick up a newspaper, TV पे जो सुर्खियां चल रही हैं, chances are that it is typeset in Nuri Nastaliq. Nuri Nastaliq, when it was originally built, was built as a set of handwritten ligatures. Ligatures implies that it was, as a Latin में, there is a vector graphic for A, there's a vector graphic for B, there's a vector graphic for C. And if you're typing any word, it would combine those graphics together and move it forward.
Right.
Nastaliq में करना मुश्किल हो जाता है.
Yeah.
To create a way that it would connect regardless of what you type.
Yeah.
So the way that they did it was that they hand wrote about 20,000 words.
Okay.
और उसको font में बना दिए. So there was shapes built in for every word. ठीक है. अच्छा, प्रॉब्लम ये आपने कोई वर्ड लिखना है जो ओरिजिनल डिक्शनरी में नहीं था, तो आप नहीं लिख सकते थे ओरिजिनली, और वो फिर डिफरेंट फॉर्म में लिखना पड़ता था. अच्छा, ये हुआ लेट 80s में. एंड सो फॉर मी, I like to think about, okay, technical vocabulary in the Urdu language. तो अगर आप उर्दू कॉलेज में जाएं तो इकोनॉमिक्स में, मैथ्स में, फिजिक्स में, you can find Urdu technical vocabulary for a lot of concepts in these disciplines, but there is no Urdu technical vocabulary for information tech, which all started 80s or beyond.
Because it's new,
Because it's new. So for me, is the fact that you literally couldn't type new words related to the fact that we stopped coming up with them. Like, can you prove that causally? No, but the coincidence is too strong to ignore.
Yeah.
So, in short, is technology one of the reasons why becoming an Urdu medium country is hard? Yes. And I think to make that argument further, कि पाकिस्तान में उर्दू natively बड़े कम लोग बोलते हैं.
Yeah.
So making Urdu medium country as a goal itself is also problematic. So you would want to, Sindhi में काम करना है, Punjabi में काम करना है. Like for me, I started in Urdu. That's a language that's native to me, and also like in terms of ability to get material, move it forward. Like Urdu is a good place to start. But you need to do that same sort of work for Sindhi, same sort of work for Pashto. Punjabi का तो tradition all complicated है because वो it was written in a different script, and तो हमारा writing tradition is a little bit different. So I think these challenges are all ones that are still we have to get to. Those are हम पहुंचे भी नहीं अभी, and those are in fact perhaps more important than even the Urdu challenge.
There seems to be it's like a small problem, वैसे if you think about it, but which has like such wide-ranging possibilities / implications, if you mess with it. You said your language is Urdu, but you're from Lahore. Is your family like originally Hindustani?
So we're from Delhi.
Oh, cool.
No, we're from Delhi. So we migrated. So in fact, my dada's family is based in Lahore, but most of our extended family is Karachi.
Okay, that's exactly
तो
like my situation. But acha,
meandering paths, हाँ, तो
does your family also live in Model Town?
we do not,
Okay.
but I know Model Town well.
Okay.
LJ जॉर्ज टाउन में जब आप हो तो आपका मॉडल टाउन से वास्ता पड़ जाता
Yes.
है.
Yes. 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 Acha. I feel like we should follow this. Like, I don't know if you're interested in having me follow this, but the एक और बात ये थी कि
Hmm.
once this is done, once you have a working, piece of tech, can that be incorporated into other applications that would benefit from having this, like homegrown products in Pakistan
So
that are
it
just
depends on what
missing
the
this? Huh.
it depends on what the technology is. So the goal was one, there's a data set anybody can use to build anything else. The keyboard anybody can use to start typing in whatever application. You could use it to type in Word, you could use it to type in Google Docs, do whatever you want with it. That's the goal. Can we use the underlying tech is sort of, I have it with me, like in terms of underlying algorithms and so forth. But there is, I tend to share a lot of my design practice with other practitioners in terms of, okay, what are the challenges that we are coming through to build this work, or wo share karna, that makes a lot of sense. So I work with a lot of people in terms of kind of putting these learnings together. And I need to publish more of them. So the goal is once we get the app out and people are using it, that we can then start sharing some of the underlying issues that we've run into for other developers. So for example, if you are typesetting a language in typesetting an app in Urdu, और आपने उसका उर्दू वर्जन बनाना है, so what's common vocabulary that you should use? जैसे okay है, cancel है, English में इसका we don't have usually like really good analogs in Urdu, or at least not ones that we've agreed on. So what are those? What are good design patterns to use? We have controversial arguments that you could make in terms of design language, like direction kis taraf jani chahiye. So I think there's a lot of user testing that needs to be done with Pakistani audiences in local languages, asking, okay, does this make sense or not? And at the moment, I don't think we've done like a big. The research that we have is not super deep. So बहुत कुछ लोग हैं. ID8 is a company in Lahore that does a lot of this. Lahore and Karachi, I think, that does a lot of this work. So I had the good fortune of running into them when I was presenting some of this work, and so we were able to find some common learnings that we had shared independently that we would otherwise have never been able to validate. So उस तरह की काफी interesting avenues हैं जो hopefully we can use.
Yeah, I'm still thinking, I'm hung up on that, the potential that has been lost and then also perhaps could be gained, because like in my mind I have this like anecdote of acha ji Chinese jo thi wo pehle Mandarin was written vertically, but then when they came to the problem of translating scientific formulas from the West, they couldn't do that vertically, so they changed the way their whole language was written just to get that learning to their people. And हम 30 साल तक aesthetics पे लड़ते रहे and then we gave up.
I mean, I don't think
with
it's necessarily that
simplistic.
Not simplistic. I don't think it's necessarily that. I'm not that pessimistic about it.
Sure.
Like I don't think that underlying the arguments themselves were problematic. Like the fact that we care so much about calligraphy is a good thing.
Yeah.
Like for me, the disappointing thing is that we were unable to convert that into technology. And the hopeful thing from looking at the Chinese issue is that उनका problem बहुत मुश्किल है. हमारा problem ये है कि हमारे लफ्ज जुड़ते हैं. But it's not like we have 50 letters. English has 20 something. Yeah. So it's not a gargantuan difference, but the number of characters that they have to print is in the thousands. Yeah. And so for them, the problem of transcribing characters digitally is a whole different ball game. So they had no other option but to go somewhere different. But the way that they enforce their standards is very like top down. Like the government decides, okay, this is now the way that we will. The opinion is a very kind of government standard. So they have a way of promulgating their standards. That is, one of the sort of Chinese way of doing it. So हमारे case में, we followed a different path, and that's fine. I think we just need to. For me, the issue is less that we care, and the issue is more that we decided that okay, पर ऐसे ठीक है.
Yeah. We stopped, but then hopefully, if this problem is crossed by efforts like yours and others, then hopefully things can. This will help in dissemination of knowledge, information, thoughts, ideas to where perhaps right now it's not being done because it's hard to cross that bridge maybe.
I mean, I think for me, like a simple way to think about it is मैं उर्दू सॉफ्टवेयर बनाता हूँ लेकिन लिखता मैं अंग्रेजी में हूँ.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
strange, right?
Yeah.
And it's just because writing comes more naturally to me in Urdu, and in a way, me building an Urdu keyboard is just a way of making sure that I no longer make typing mistakes that my family makes fun of me for. Urdu mein hai, te ki jagah to nahi dal diya.
Yeah.
And so now I have literally spent 5 years trying to avoid being told off.
This should go into one of those, like, Asian parent tropes. Oh, I didn't want to disappoint my dad, so I invented a whole new keyboard.
So I think if you and I had tools like this, like अगर हम उर्दू में टाइपिंग करते हुए आसान होता हमारे लिए गलतियां ना करना, there's a higher chance that we would write more things in Urdu.
Yeah.
We would text more in Urdu. We would write some things in Urdu. We would be a little bit more bilingual, at least in our writing. So for me, that is an interesting goal for like 5 years. 10, 15, who knows what happens. But, it starts very, very small. Like you have to build a lot of tech to achieve a very small change. And then, it goes from there. So that's the goal.
Hard pivot then to to the music newsletter by the name of Hamnawa. जिसके बारे में हमने बात करनी थी, but like I'm very fascinated about this Urdu thing. I didn't expect it to be such a deep well of information, I guess is the way to say it. But what is the एकदम से किसी ने मुझे भेजा कि oh bro, ये newsletter, and they sent it to me after my Manu episode where you had mentioned that Manu. I was like, somebody quoted me. That's all I focused on for a while. But then I was like, acha, ek newsletter bhi hai. Like this is a thing. What is it and why did you do it?
So let's start with your Manu interview. I think, as you know from being in this world, is that there's very little primary information for people that are not like in the middle of the scene to understand what is happening, right? And so if you were to writing about this from a academic standpoint or any journalistic standpoint, कुछ भी नहीं, आपको कुछ पता ही नहीं होता क्या हो रहा है. Like you have no understanding of what people's motivations are, what they are trying to say. In fact, some of the work that you do is critical, right? Like the sort of interviews that you do, learning about, like for me, I didn't know much about Manu's motivation or his journey before I heard you talking about him. So for me, it made a lot more sense to stylely connect it together. So I think, a lot of the work that you're doing with this sort of thing, with this podcast is similar, right? So that's the underlying motivation, which is, okay, can we start writing about songs in a way that is like descriptive, it's exploratory, that tells something of a story about the culture in a way that you can look back at it in 5 years and make sense of what was happening. So, I started writing about Pakistani music, over a decade ago. And that was for me the goal then, which is, okay, can we start documenting this in some way? So I've done it on and off for a while, for many years. And then I think a couple of years ago, the goal was, okay, can we make it more regular? Like, can I find a way of saying more things about more songs? Because I fell into a trap where I was like writing really long pieces about a few songs, and then eventually too much was happening that I was missing. So the goal was, okay, can I start like basically mapping out the scene for myself and for other people in a way that you can start framing everything that is happening in a larger context. So, Desi hip hop is like an interesting, way of talking about this, which is for people like us that left 15 years ago, but even for people in Pakistan now, understanding the local rap scene, if you have no idea about it, is like it's very difficult to figure out what happened, how it happened, kya ho raha hai, kaise, what are the structures. And then, once you get into it, you can get into it. But I think it says a lot about overall what is happening in the culture. Why are people joining the scene? Why is this appealing to people? What are they saying? What does this say about the audience from many standpoints? Like, what are these people's problems? What are they interested in? What songs catch on? What songs don't? What artistic narratives are continuing through? So for me, that's where it came from. So the way that I do it now is that I pick songs that I like, and I will try to describe some context around them that makes it easier to understand what is happening, and makes you maybe understand and connect with the song a little bit more. And then I will collect the songs that I like into playlists just so that it's easy to follow what's happening.
So how long have you been doing this?
Hamnawa now for 2 years. Like, I've been writing about music for a long time, but Hamnawa in this form about 2 years.
Right. Where were you writing about music prior?
Blogs.
Acha, blogs. Huh. Um, See, because the thing is that your name is not a common name, Zeerak, and
Yeah.
I feel like, pata nahi kyun, like it. I might have come across something because when the first time I saw the name, I was like, yeah, it was like it's not like, oh, I haven't heard this name before. It's like, हाँ जीरक भी एक नाम होता है. I know nobody. I've never met a Zeerak in my life. So हो सकता है कि I came across something previously, but खैर, the thing that I was wondering was 2 years is not a huge amount of time in terms of Pakistan ki music ki history. But were this to continue, it would be possible to properly map, and music keeps continuing in Pakistan because sometimes music also just stops. It would be possible to map out these movements, of like the hip hop thing that's happening right now, where you said that it's weird with hip hop where the Gen Z and younger kids जिनके ज़माने में आया है, they're fully into it, and उनसे ऊपर nobody knows ये क्या हुआ, कैसे हुआ, why is this a thing? Asad Ahmed goes on Qazi's thing and he says कि होना ही नहीं चाहिए. Did you see that? That was hilarious. Asad Ahmed, much respect, but he's like, यार हमें करना ही नहीं चाहिए. This is like a African American movement और हमने क्यों कर लिया? I was like, that's a very अच्छा, but rock music कौन सा मतलब? But khair, so yeah, there is that gap, and then I feel like it adds more depth to a scene, right? It's not just ke हाँ जी this इस बंदे ने गाने गाने थे इसने गा लिए मैंने सुन लिए खत्म. Right, there's like, if you add things like the that you add, like motivations and context and um deeper inferences that can be made from lyrics and musical trends, that just adds so much more. क्या कह सकते हैं, डेप्थ ही हो सकता है वो कह सकते हैं, to the whole thing. What is then is that part of the purpose? You mentioned what the purpose is with Hamnawa, but like, is that something that you want to achieve as well with this?
Yeah, I mean, like, so last year I published a directory of like active musicians that I was interested in,
Oh, very good.
right?
Yeah, okay.
Which is for me, it's just like, oh, can we make a list of everybody that is producing music? Because in 2 years, that list will disappear.
Yeah.
Like it will be really hard to kind of map that out.
Yeah.
Abhi to Spotify, but you can see like artwork, but the platform changes. It's hard to figure out kind of who was producing music when and who was active. So I maintain that directory internally, and like I try to publish it periodically as a way of just saying, okay, what is coming in, what genres are becoming big, what genres are becoming smaller. So that's kind of just early map out of okay, हो क्या रहा है scene में. और उसके बाद then yes, like if people use like a desi meme in a song, like Faris saying Moses Arif, for example, like 20 years down the line, it may be hard to figure out where that comes from unless you are able to make the connection now, which is to say, so I think writing down these little nuances and sort of some connections will, from a sort of historical standpoint, is useful. I think about undergrads writing about Pakistani music in 10 years, and I want them to have something to go off of. Some interesting argument to make. So that's kind of the underlying, when I write about stuff, that is the sort of thing in my head that I am writing
because I remember,
about.
obviously, this is a thing that Abhi recently I spoke to that electronic music duo Fake Shamans, and they said they had incorporated some Eastern music, Eastern influences into their house music thing, and they're like, हाँ हमने बड़ी फिर research करनी शुरू की because we wanted to learn about it, and we found like some crazy Pakistani music that was made in like the 70s and 80s and which is also something that Natasha Nurani the Great has also said with Peshkash, where you just are discovering these people जो कि Pakistan में थे and they were famous and now it's gone. Like you discovered like it's some archaeological find, and there's this huge gap between when they were active and now, which makes it just harder to tap into.
This is true of the 90s. If you go to the Park Music Archive, which is still online, you will find bands that you're like, wait a second, you got it. And like bands that I like vaguely even remember seeing and did not know what they were called because it's gone, and like I often मुझे कब कब होता है people write in being like, oh, I have this song in my mind, उसमें शायद ये हो रहा था, can you find it for me? And it's like, sometimes you find it, but sometimes you don't. And occasionally like realizing that we are so close to losing things that we know exist but don't have access to. And this is not something that Google can help with,
No,
because
no, no, no.
they has no material to go off of.
Yeah.
So uh, uh, that's the underlying goal, which is that you can go and look back at it and just say, okay, acha, kya ho raha tha, kyun
That
interesting
is,
tha.
yeah, and that's so like exactly in line with the why I talk to musicians or why I talk to like content creators, because I only ask them about what you do and how you did it. And the purpose is कि अच्छा किसी और को देखना हो तो they can look at it, because that's my interest. I'm like, oh, how'd you do it? And बस ठीक है. I don't talk to them about like any current event, anything relevant, nothing. Just what you do and how you did it.
And I think it's just like, the thing to think about is that you are deep in this, right?
Yeah.
You are doing this work like basically as a job, right? Like you are
Yeah.
spending hours a week just
Yeah.
following this scene. And if there is something that you don't know, the chances that it is generally known is minuscule. And the chances that it will be remembered are even lower than that. So I think that's it's a good bar to go in with, which is to say, like, do I understand what is happening here or not?
Yeah.
If not,
Yeah,
can I
yeah.
just like ask the questions to get some facts? And
Yeah.
it is, in a sense, it's easy because it's not hard. You're not like mapping, you're not theorizing what is happening. You are literally just obtaining facts and transcribing,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is hard work but easy work.
Yeah.
So I think that as a motivation, that is very valuable. And this is true of, I think, lots of our cultural practice. Like lots of rationale about why decisions are made, why creative decisions are made, why we went down a particular direction are not well known. Like all of the discussion we had about Urdu fonts or Urdu technology is like, we didn't grow up learning about this, and I find that problematic. And I think same is true for music or film. Like that it is easier for us growing up to get into other nations' cultures as opposed to our own.
100%. Yeah.
Implies that there is something missing. So finding ways of making that a little bit easier to digest or understand, I think, is important. और मैं और आप एक diaspora angle से भी कर रहे हैं उसको, from just sort of being far away, like knowing it but not knowing it, and knowing people around us that are disconnected and are looking for some sort of connection. I think that provides a different angle to it. For people that are not abroad and living in Pakistan, that changes things a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
that
for
cultural
me, it's just,
thing, when you compare that American music specifically or English music, you can have like detailed records and write-ups and articles and reviews and thought pieces going back to like the 50s at least. And in Pakistan, that doesn't exist or isn't available as commonly. It makes you think, I'm sure people think कि हमारे पास था नहीं. Like we just didn't have that cultural output. It's not that the output didn't exist, that the documentation wasn't maintained or didn't exist to that level.
Right.
And that's how you then forget things.
My favorite red flag is anytime somebody claims to be the first Pakistani anything, is to just ignore everything from that point on.
Yeah.
Because the chances that it is true are so low.
Yeah.
That it is.
Do you want to illustrate with examples? Yeah. Yeah, log bura maan jayenge.
I think I remember when Noori was launching their like live album. They were like, first live album.
Yeah.
उससे 5 साल पहले एक और थी जुनून की, which is like not obscure.
Yeah.
And then they corrected themselves to their credit. They were like, nahi, galti ho gayi. But I think this in technology, this happens a lot. Like first piece of technology ever do this, and first person to speak elsewhere. I remember when Fakhr Alam, I think, was speaking at Google, and they were like, "Oh, Pakistani Fakhr Alam being invited to speak at Google." And I remember, all respect to Fakhr Alam.
Why was he invited to speak at Google?
I mean, there was some event, probably. I'm a big company, उन्होंने किसी event तो बुला लिया होगा, as an artist. They get in external speakers. And so, good for Fakhr Alam. I really like him. I enjoy Fakhr Alam quite a bit.
Sure.
And I'm glad that he was there. But then people were like celebrating it. And I was like, there are probably hundreds of Pakistanis that speak at Google and do influential technology work that you have not yet heard of.
Yeah.
And so as much as we need to celebrate this instance, like sometimes what it ends up doing is that it ends up creating the illusion कि आगे और कुछ है ही नहीं.
Yeah.
Yani this is so big an achievement कि आगे हमने कुछ किया ही नहीं,
Yeah.
That is where I begin to get a little bit worried. So I think stories, which is just like assume that it's the first time you've heard about something is the first time that it's happened.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that. That's a great thing to witness.
uh,
Something I should have asked at the beginning of this
yeah.
music discussion. Why do you write about music? Like, what is your connection with music? Did you just listen to a lot of music? Were you around it? Were you in a band?
Yeah, I mean, was I in a band is a dangerous question. I've been part of many failed bands, which
Acha,
I was
acha.
once told that being a failed musician is the perfect qualification to be a music critic. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
fit that
I am
fit that
also.
qual.
I am
हाँ तो
also.
अच्छी बात है ना इसलिए तो हम लिखते हैं.
Yeah,
So we know just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually do something useful.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, so I started writing about this again. This was one of the like college things where I got into. I realized that like I knew enough about it to say some useful things, and I could say interesting things. Like for me, right now when I write and I like artists will respond to it, or it's clear that they have read it or
Mm-hmm.
inferring something from it, that gives me the belief that okay, there is something meaningful that is being added from this conversation. And so really it's this sort of um, uh, kind of reflexive process where I'm obviously getting something from this music. There's something that I feel like I have to say that is unique, that is different. So I don't write about every song I listen to.
Right.
I don't write about all songs that are released, and I don't have something useful to say about all the songs that I even like. So I tend to write about songs that I have something useful to say, and then if somebody responds to that, that gives me the belief, okay, अच्छा चलो कुछ फायदा है करने का, कर
Do
सकते हैं हम.
you devote any energy towards songs you don't like dislike even? Yeah, is it better to
Very,
focus?
very, very rarely,
Acha,
because I think for me that's not really. Um,
the point.
I don't know what it adds aside of ability to diss on the
Sure.
internet, right? Which is like there is not. Uh, there's a lot of that on the internet.
Okay.
For me, it is as we talked about the purpose of the writing, like the interesting thing is capturing what is interesting about a song. And if people like it, then there is more kind of historical relevance to the work as well, because it'll probably spread more. There's probably more interesting things to track through it. You are more likely to like learn about the artist. I think the artists get good feedback also. It's very easy to like find songs that you don't like and then point out all the things that are wrong with it, but I don't find that constructive. Like
Sure,
even
sure.
with songs that I do like, I often like, okay, these are areas, directions that we have not seen the artist gone in before, but it'd be interesting to see that happen. So often I will like make an argument like this that I think is it's not meant to be disparaging or
Ah.
discouraging,
And
but is meant to
also
be okay.
and also it's not like your job. So it's not like you have to
Yeah,
review everybody and then there will have to be people who you don't like and then you talk about it. If you're only doing it as a passion project which has the intensity of a job, but then you can just talk about people, who you like and who inspire you, and that pushes things forward in a constructive way.
yeah. I mean, there's enough good music to write about.
Ha, ha,
So I
ha.
don't feel the need to tell people what music not to listen to.
Sure,
Like I don't
sure.
think that is a problem we are trying to solve.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
for me, the interest is for uh, how do I make it easier for people to enjoy a song more
Okay.
or learn more about a song that they already enjoy, and how
Yeah,
do I make it
yeah.
easier for artists to understand why their work is relevant to their audience, and what would be interesting to watch them do as an audience as well. I
Yeah.
think those are really interesting things to do, and there's enough of that to be said for me not to worry about do I have enough to say,
Yeah,
if
and
that makes
and
sense.
has that led to वही वाली बात, like the what I understand this as being is adding just way more context and depth and flavor to just what could just be a song or a video. But has that led to any traffic coming the other way, like people reaching out to you after reading a newsletter or a comment or an artist, like you mentioned that artists have reached out to you. Has that led to any unexpected sort of feedback or interactions?
um, I think occasionally artists will reach out to me and will want to have something written.
Acha.
And so we'll talk about
Oh, that's
stuff.
interesting.
So occasionally I'll do like, email type interviews. We did one podcast style interview, which I need to do more of, but haven't gone into. There'll be like, comments here and there, where I know that, the artists are reading, but even if they don't have something like substantial to respond back with. So होता रहता है ऐसे थोड़ा बहुत, but I think
Yeah,
it's
okay.
mostly with this sort of work. I think as you probably noticed also is a lot more is perceived than you get back in the
Right.
moment. Like
Right.
I was writing a blog over like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and now I meet people that knew it, and I'm like, well, where were
Mm.
you then when I lost all the motivation to
Yeah.
write it because I didn't? And I
Yeah.
think having gone through that, this experience has taught me that if you're putting stuff out there and it is reaching like some base level of audience,
Yeah.
that it is having some impact even if you don't hear about it. And so occasionally I will get to hear about it, which will get my motivation back up.
Mm-hmm.
um, and a few people will write back. The newsletter format actually allows people to respond privately in a way that like
Right.
commenting on a blog doesn't. So a lot of people will write back and tell me, oh, this was interesting, this was not, what is happening
Mm.
here, I really like this song. And so that gives me a sense of like, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what is interesting. And so that's where I base my kind of creative decisions off of.
Okay.
Does that happen with you with this podcast?
Uh, Rizwan has gotten recognized in public a few times,
That's
and
awesome.
to the point where people have asked him to repeat lines that he said on the podcast, and I was like, like, "Acha chalo." Um, with regard, yeah, I think the length of my podcasts is a problem because again, मैं इधर उधर की बात नहीं करता, right? So it's all like when I spoke to Kazi about this when I was in Karachi in January or something. Um, it was yahi ke if you're not interested in what that person does and who they are, you will not find anything interesting in the whole episode. So that really narrows down the pool, the audience pool. Because you can't just come in and हाँ मेरे interest की कोई तो बात हो ही रही होगी या ऐसा कुछ ना. I'm like no, like in this episode, if you're not
One,
interested in
yeah.
fonts and written language and writing about music, there's no like Pakistan ke halat
Yeah,
discuss nahi
you
ho
are telling
rahe.
me that I can bore people easily. I am
Yeah.
aware of this too. Uh,
But people want.
I have taught undergrads before, so I am
Huh.
painfully aware. Uh, no, I think one of the things I heard about podcasts that is really good is that you come for the topic, but then you stay for the people. And I
Sure.
think what you are describing with Rizwan is similar, which
Yeah.
is that you end up building this like network of inside jokes and network of personalities that
Yeah.
then become a kind of thing that you want
Huh.
to follow of its own. I find it interesting actually if you follow musicians as well, because of their Instagram presence, you are basically following groups of friends who live
Yes.
out their work life,
Yeah.
And
Because
I think this
all
happens.
musicians in Pakistan are influencers as well. Have to be.
Yeah, they have to be. I mean, all
Yeah.
musicians everywhere have to be. But this is, I think, for podcasters interesting as well. I follow a few podcast scenes that are basically insular. They आपस में बहुत multiple,
Yeah.
there's like variations of podcasts. There's a WhatsApp group, but there is
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
लोगों का
Yeah.
WhatsApp group, उसमें variations बन जाती है, -1
Yeah.
इधर से, दो
Yeah.
उधर कट के एक और group बन जाता है, फिर एक और
Yeah.
लोगों का group बन जाता है. उस तरह this podcast universe has developed, and I think the same thing happens where once you find a character that you find interesting, then you will find other people that are interesting around. I think the hard thing with the sort of interview format where new people come in every week is that recurring cast of characters does not yet develop.
Yeah.
And so, I love the ones where you go back to your main crew.
The Chalan crew wale na, those have those things where you come for the topic but stay for the people because they have
Right.
a एक ही cast. But then masla ye hai कि interviews कैसे होंगे, and then interviews are like it's like person to person, and but like I enjoy it.
Yeah, no, if you enjoy it, it's good, right? I mean, but it's just it's a different audience. Like the people that are coming in, like either need to know about the audience or need to enjoy the interview enough that they are like interested in that sort of format. Like I don't think that the nature of it is necessarily problematic.
And my perceived, my dissatisfaction with the perceived slow growth has led me to go into like the completely other direction. Like, but मैं और nerdy करूँगा इसको. दफा हो तुम लोग. Like I started the roundup वाली series. I'm like, well, करना ही नहीं है accessible. ठीक है? Like we're gonna talk only in English. It's gonna be nerdy shit. Like we're gonna talk about like focal lengths and ये और वो Coke Studio के बारे में बात हो रही है. एक दफा वाली सेटी का जिक्र like मुश्किल बात है.
That's very hard. I think मुझे भी होता है कभी कोई problem. Like I'm now a pretty like small audience in the grand scheme of things. And my initial theory was that I used to write like really obscure long articles for a while.
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Acha nahi, thoda sa na. Like, what if I just make it like easier to digest and publish more frequently?" And that theory did not work out as I expected. Like, it's still interesting as a format. Like, people are still reading it more, they're interacting with it more. I get to write about more things. but it's not that like the regularity and digestibility of it necessarily created
Hmm.
a,
Yeah. Direct
a
correlation
large
नहीं है.
audience. Direct correlation है. Like the you know, I get when I get new followers is like the weirdest things. Like it makes very little sense.
अच्छा.
So yeah, so I've stopped. Like it's obviously like whenever your audience grows, it's nice, but I don't necessarily like. I think uh, in the kind of Instagram world with like follower counts and everything, it can be very like demoralizing
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
feel stuck. You know.
Yeah. It's not
So
that. It's not also that you always care about comparing followings, but just because you can see the numbers, it becomes hard to not take that into consideration.
yeah,
Which is just, I guess, a social media, just a fact of social media.
one of the good pieces of advice I heard was if you have a website, to just not have Google Analytics on it
Yeah.
because like, do you really care how many people are going to your website?
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be nice just to not know? And I think from a technological standpoint, we are coming to a point where we are actually discussing things which are we shouldn't build. Right? This is a good discussion that happens with deepfakes now, which is like, yes, we have the
Yes.
ability to
Yes.
build it, but it feels like we shouldn't build it.
Yeah.
But this is true of lots of other things as well, which is like, do I want this or
No.
do I not? Like I have a fun joke that I like to tell, which is one of my friends installed a smart fire alarm or ये water sensor ना अपने घर में. अच्छा वो उनका पहले कोई इशू था वहां पे, तो वो सेंसर ना फॉल्स अलार्म होता रहता. अब हम खाना खा रहे हैं तो उनका सेंसर बोल रहा है तो उसको इग्नोर कर रहे हैं. सेंसर इतना एक्टिव था, सेंसर ने ना उनके मामू को फोन कर दिया तो भाई ये लोग फोन नहीं उठा रहे, इनके घर में पानी लीक हो रहा है. अच्छा खाना छोड़ के हम उसके घर तक गए, वहां पे घर बोल रहे हैं ऊंचा, अटेंशन अटेंशन देयर इज अ वाटर लीक. और पता है कि वाटर लीक नहीं है. तक नहीं चाहिए मुझे ये, ठीक हूँ मैं अपने
Yeah,
डम नॉन
like
टॉकिंग सेंसर के साथ.
I don't have any like smart assistant, smart home products,
या
and I don't plan to get any. Like वो देखते हैं ना आपके टीवी में Alexa, I was like ये नहीं चाहिए. मैं टीवी नहीं
अच्छा,
लेता.
प्रॉब्लम ये कि बहुत हम उस ट्रैप में फंसने लगे हैं जिसमें हम होने लगे हैं ओल्ड अंकल्स.
Yeah.
यानी कि ट्रैप ये कि भाई हमारे जमाने में तो ठीक था,
Yeah.
हमारी टेक्नोलॉजी चल रही है, तुम्हें ये क्यों चाहिए?
Yeah.
Because I'm
Yeah.
reaching that point with computers where like new things pop up and I was like, I don't want this.
Yeah.
Like I remember when new OS releases were coming out like 15 years ago, I was like, oh, exciting new feature, and now I'm just like, please don't change it. Till now, I
हाँ.
have a system that works.
Rizwan,
Don't break it, please.
before he moved to iOS recently, Rizwan ने मतलब कोई 3 versions of Android पीछे चल रहा था वो. Like he just didn't upgrade. कुछ हो ना जाए. Like क्या होगा? As in,
I am unfortunately reaching that position. I'm calm pay. We had just switched from Sketch to Figma,
Okay.
which that if you're in the discipline, you will
Yeah,
know
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like basically we switched programs, and it's fine. Like I understand why we made it, but I am like an old grump about
Yeah.
it, right? और मेरे से जो like people older than me are like, yes, we made the change, and I'm just like, my keyboard shortcuts are no longer working. I hate this transition. I want to be in the old world. तो हम
Yeah.
अपना जो है ना एक वो 1.5 ईंट की मस्जिद हमने बनाई हुई है जिसको हम बस रोज स्ट्रगल करते रहते हैं. So yeah, I'm with you. I think there is um, uh, uh, I feel very hard, difficult sometimes. जब मैं कभी Snapchat इस्तेमाल करता हूँ and I'm just like, oh, now I'm old. This
Oh,
is not meant for me.
Why do you use Snapchat?
I don't.
अच्छा,
Like
you don't.
I
नहीं,
use
I
it
didn't
only as
mean
a
to make it an
professional.
accusation.
No. I mean,
अच्छा.
you feel free to. But it is. I feel like using Snapchat for me is a professional exercise
Right.
in how I am now obsolete. Where
Right,
you are like,
yeah.
I have no idea what is happening. And it is designed to be that way. It is designed to be obscure to people that don't understand it, right? Because it's meant for people that it's meant to be hard to get into. It builds loyalty in a different way than I have been taught to do. Like हमें software बनाते होता है, okay, like make everything easy to understand, लोगों को इस्तेमाल करना आ जाए. And this seems to be like, have people be rewarded for the work they put in into understanding your app. And I was like, this is totally against all of the principles of how I do my work.
Yeah.
Um,
And there is
so-
also like I'm very addicted to TikTok, and the Snapchat thing over there is the best filters because they invested the most into AR tech. They come from Snapchat. And एक अलग जंग चली यार, ये फिल्टर कहाँ से आया मैं नहीं बताऊंगा कहाँ से वो Snapchat से आया था, and then you're porting it to TikTok. But खैर, I think I will have to, for the वही audience considerations, हम यहाँ रोकते हैं जरा episode. Is there anything about the things we talked about that I have missed or you didn't get a chance to talk about that you want to mention abhi? Yeah.
No,
next
no.
time?
I mean, this is things that I can go on for a long time. So this is a dangerous door to open. So I will go with no.
Okay,
I think we did mention the name of the Urdu Keyboard project. So I guess that's worth
sure.
mentioning. So the Urdu Keyboard is called Matansaz. I spell it Matnsaz. So I think that if people want to read about it, that would be
Send me a
useful.
link. I'll put it in the description
We
thing.
mentioned. Okay, sounds good. I will.
Do you have any jinn stories?
I do not have any jinn stories.
सुनी सुनाई भी नहीं कोई अच्छी याद हो?
I think my family was we never got into that
Right.
realm. Like हम वो दरवाजा ही नहीं खोलते. And so like every family is like things where they're like not engaging.
Yeah.
So I think it became one of those things where we just never engaged that much, and so
Okay.
I don't even have recollections of jinn stories.
That's fair. People always seem very like embarrassed when they say कि नहीं, I have no jinn stories. Like, this is normal. To not have personal encounters is the normal thing. आप बुरा ना समझे. But okay.
This is great. What an interesting exercise. मेरा एक दोस्त है, क्योंकि people feeling embarrassed. इसी तरह की मेरा एक दोस्त था इंडियन. उसने अपने बाथरूम में ना उसका एक गधा बना हुआ था और गधा was relieving himself और उधर हिंदी में कुछ लिखा हुआ था. तो मैं बाहर निकल के मैंने उससे पूछा कि ये क्या लिखा हुआ है इस चीज पे. तो मुझे कहता है कि सिर्फ देसी लोग ये सवाल पूछते हैं. Like no non-desi person has ever asked what does it say this gada is doing.
Yeah.
Obviously उस पे लिखा होता है कि देखो गधा पेशाब कर रहा है.
Yeah.
Which is, amusing, great, love it, but
classic. Yeah.
Like why would you not have it in your bathroom? Of course, especially a bathroom that other people are using.
Yeah. I wonder, is it because we recognize this? Achha, khair, baad mein baat karte hain. Thank you very much, Zeerak, for coming. I'll put your links. Do you want to be found on the internet personally?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I think that'd be great. So we'll put our links down.
Yeah, home address, वगैरह सब आप बता दें, and we'll figure out what to do with it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, we're gonna stop recording now. Thank you for watching. Abrupt ending as always. Bye everyone.